Nice, Jordan.
Look confused over there. Yeah. Get ready for the hot mic, guys.
You're in a hot mic right now. Laffy. So, I definitely had a negative betting day yesterday because I think I live bet the Chargers like 7 times.
Most inexplicable team in football.
Dude, I swear to God, I think I bet them live 7 times.
Flexing. Yo, we're live. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Awesemo.com NFL Strategy Show, Showdown edition. Hot mics coming in cold. You know how it works around here. Testing new things out, seeing what works and what doesn't. But what does work is there's a lot of money to be made tonight. Another Millie Maker coming up at 8:20, maybe 8:30 Eastern time between the Tampa Bay Bucs and the New York Giants. It's very likely going to be a rout, but that doesn't matter. And somebody mentioned to me yesterday on Twitter, why are you even watching this Sunday night football game? Well, Matt Gajewski, with me, as always, will agree that when there's money to be made, who cares who's playing? That's what makes it more interesting, Matt. That's why you are going to get viewership on these games, whereas otherwise, no one would even be watching them.
Oh, dude, I have a real problem. Like the MAC, college football, like Toledo, those teams, they play on Wednesday night, and I watch those games. So when we get real professional football, whether it's the Cowboys, the Eagles, the Jets, I don't care. I'm going to play Showdown, and I'm going to watch all of these games.
Yep. Yesterday was really something else. I mean, nothing is more tilting for me than watching that Eagles team and Carson Wentz. But you know what? I had a good night of showdowns. The idea that people say there's no reason to play showdowns because everyone dupes lineups and stuff, it's really not. It's not true. Like if you're only entering the Millie Maker, you know, there are going to be times where, yeah, things go terribly wrong for you. But honestly, Matt, I think shows like this, and this is why we started doing these morning shows on top of the live before locks, is because there is an edge to be had with these, and there is real strategy that goes into playing these showdown slates, and you'll see it every single night, every Sunday, every Monday, and every Thursday. And thank God there was a showdown slate and an afternoon slate, because despite the abundance of Dalvin Cook ownership that I had, you guys know I loved Dalvin Cook throughout the week, even a lot of Metcalf. My main slate still did not go according to plan. So not only is this a great time to get back on your feet if you had a tough run, but it's a whole lot of fun. And while we probably have another blowout on our hands today, I'm excited to talk about it.
I am too. And just to your point on Showdown, I think we can sometimes find some really soft action in Showdown, whether it's people just, like throwing a lineup in to have action on the slate. But there's a lot of game theory and roster construction that goes into this. There's a lot of deep knowledge. We need to know the 4th and 5th pass catcher and the backup tight end and which running back is going to come in and play 10 snaps and maybe vulture a touchdown. All that's very important to Showdown. And I'm super pumped we get to do these shows too.
We're happy to have all you guys with us as always. I hope you guys had a good day yesterday. We're back on the horse again, and we're going to make it happen. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, we're almost at 40,000. We're making that push, and you guys are the reason that we're almost there. We're like 60 away from 40,000 subscribers. And, if you don't like it, just hit unsubscribe. But it helps both of us. When we got new shows, you get recommended more in your feed. And I know a lot of you guys are watching anyway, but, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and hit that thumbs up if you haven't done so yet. So I want to jump into something before we get into the injuries, before we get into the spread and all of that stuff. I want to hit you with a potential strategy idea. And it's one that yesterday, of all the lineups that I hand built for certain entries, right? every single one of them, Matt, and it worked out. Not to say that it was necessarily going to always work out, but I went with 5-1 approaches on every one of those hand-built lineups, meaning I had 5 Eagles players, defense included in one of those, and 1 Cowboys player. And I feel like once again tonight, we could be staring down the barrel of a very, very similar situation to we saw yesterday, where the Eagles defense was 6,200. Today, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense is an unbelievable $7,400. It tells you a lot about what we're working with.
Yeah, to the 5-1 approach, historically, last year in particular, we saw that just the hit rate, the rate that lineup was in the top 1% was much higher than the rate at which the field was rostering that 5-1 construction. And then I think to your point, in tonight's slate in particular, we have a blowout potential game here with it. It's a 12.5 point spread. And I think when you see these lopsided spreads and you want to target a lot of Tampa Bay players, for example, one way to do that and still remain unique in your lineup and have a shot at taking this down is to do that 5-1 approach. So I'm with you. I like the 5-1 approach a lot. It's something I try to do on most slates, not just because of, blowout factors, but because it's not rostered enough by the field.
For sure. Now, yesterday, the Eagles had a 26.5 point implied total. The Cowboys were at 16.5. We won't get into the specifics there. Carson Wentz had 4 turnovers. I believe the Cowboys had 3 takeaways on the season before last game. Carson Wentz gave them 4 more. The Eagles amazingly covered on that late defensive touchdown that should have been ruled down after the fumble. But that's neither here nor there. Here's the point. You had a 43-point total. The Eagles had a 26.5 point implied total. They were 10-point favorites. Cowboys at 16.5. Now listen to this, Matt. Today, the Bucs on the road, Eagles were home yesterday. The Bucs have a 29-point implied total. They're 13-point favorites, 45-point over-under. It's down 3 points. And the Giants have a 16-point implied total themselves. So a lot of similarities here that we can take from yesterday and some of these other games. But there's no question that Sunday Night Football and Monday Night Football for Week 8 are in 2 spots where there are 2 offenses that are very much incapable of moving the football, especially against quality defenses. So, we have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, we do for sure. And I think a lot of that is reflected in the spread. And I think when you're building your showdown lineups, you always want to tell yourself a story. And the easy one I think you can tell yourself today is that Tampa Bay is going to roll New York. We see it basically in all of the metrics we're looking at, including the Vegas totals. I do think it lends itself to that 5-1 construction, but obviously there's going to be ways to get unique there.
So are there any ways, as we set the table for looking at both of these teams, are there any ways, in your opinion, and I know the obvious answer is yes, but I'm going to ask you to divulge a little bit more. Are there any ways that the Giants keep this close? And if they do, how does it happen?
I think they're going to have to rely on their pass game. And it's basically something they've been forced into all year because they've been trailing. They're passing at the 7th highest rate in the NFL. I do not think they're going to have any success with their run game. They lost arguably their best offensive lineman, Loughran Hernandez. He's on the COVID list. They've been using 12 personnel a lot more in recent weeks, and it's not because they're running pass plays out of 12 personnel. They've actually been using Caden Smith to block. They've had a lot of struggles blocking. I think most of their success is probably going to come in the short passing game. And again, not likely, but if it happens, I think that's how it will occur.
Let's dive into it. Let's talk about this Tampa Bay Bucs first. They've looked very good this season. And there was a lot of hate for Tom Brady out there that he wouldn't be able to get it done, that, he was cooked, while ignoring entirely the fact that last year he was working with a cast of characters that couldn't get deep downfield, and a bunch of players that made life a lot more difficult for him. And the run game was stagnant in most cases, despite their intentions to lean on him. You look now, Ronald Jones is having a pretty solid season. Leonard Fournette, when healthy, has actually been pretty competent himself. And then Rob Gronkowski appears to actually be back up to speed. We've seen that over the past few weeks. And Tom Brady's thrown 18 touchdowns through this point of the season without having consistent, healthy receivers in his 2 top guys, in Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. And Chris Godwin is out again today. Not to go off on a tangent here, I'll be quick, Matt, but I really liked Godwin coming into this season, right? And I thought that he could actually take a similar role in some capacity as Julian Edelman, because both of them ran 70+% of routes out of the slot last year. If you look at Chris Godwin's games, he only has 3 passes thrown to him this year that haven't been caught. So when healthy, he has been arguably Tom Brady's favorite target. Actually, no, he has been his favorite target when healthy. But he's out again today. But Mike Evans is likely going to see a lot of shadow coverage from James Bradberry, and that's where we'll start.
This is one of the few corner situations where I think we should factor in at least a little bit of negative performance, because James Bradberry has been phenomenal. And it's really interesting because the Giants as a pass funnel defense haven't been great. So speaking to the pass funnel point, they're allowing 7.2 yards per pass attempt. That's 12th. They're allowing 3.7 yards per rush attempt. That's 28th. So they're very good against the run, and they've still been suspect against the pass. However, most of that production is coming away from James Bradberry's coverage. He's been phenomenal, and he is one of the few corners that will shadow. He shadowed almost every single week this year. And right now, like everywhere you look, PFF, they have it. James Bradberry up against Mike Evans. Mike Evans already fairly disappointing this year. He just has 2 targets in each of his last 2 games and a 15% target share on the season. I know he was banged up a little bit to start, but that's still really disappointing for a guy that we had high expectations coming into the year, not to mention his lofty price tag.
What are your thoughts here so Chris Godwin on the year? By the way, Bruce Arians is very much, and if you just look at the numbers, very much willing to move these guys around, right? You're not seeing one guy runs exclusively out of the slot, one lined up in the left, one lined up in the right. Chris Godwin's run 67% of his snaps out of the slot this season. If you take the games that he hasn't played, right? He was inactive in week 2. He was inactive in weeks, I think it was 4 and 5, right? So if you take those games, weeks 2, 4, and 5, and you look at who's running the majority of snaps out of the slot, because I think this can funnel us to some decision making here. Tyler Johnson, 67% out of the slot. Justin Watson, 61%. Get this though, Mike Evans, 37% of his snaps out of the slot. He's been targeted 10 times out of the slot when Godwin's been out. No one else has seen more than 4. So it's really tough to just say, all right, you know what? This guy will supplant Chris Godwin. All of those routes out of the slot, all of those snaps out of the slot, I should say. You're just not seeing that. They're moving these guys around a lot. But I think one thing we can agree on is that if Bradberry shadows Evans, it's going to open things up for these secondary and tertiary options that Tom Brady has not been afraid to get to this year.
That was my first thought too. And do you remember like 2 weeks ago, you and I covered a Showdown slate it was Tampa Bay, I believe, and there were some injuries, and we had Tyler Johnson at the minimum price.
Yep.
Yeah, Tyler Johnson.
We did it with Steve Buzzard, right? With the Colts. Yeah,
you're exactly right. And that was Tyler Johnson's first real appearance in the NFL. He had 6 targets that game. And to your point on Tom Brady not being afraid to target these tertiary options, Tyler Johnson, that was really his first game, 6 targets immediately, popped off for a big game. I believe he scored. And I mean, just looking at what we expect without Chris Godwin, I think Scotty Miller is going to be a full-time player. He had the huge game last week, 9 targets. But Tyler Johnson, he also ran a route on 45% of dropbacks. He only saw 2 targets himself, but now with Godwin out for the game entirely, this is another team we're not seeing run a lot of 12 personnel anymore. I think it's going to be mostly 11 personnel with Evans, Miller, and Johnson on the field.
So you basically just broke it down. Let me take it one step further. Who do you think benefits the most specifically from Godwin being out and James Bradberry being really the one? And I don't want to emphasize it too much, but I do think it's important because Tom Brady, if someone like Evans is being shadowed, it's not a spot where I think you have to force him to football, especially against the Giants defense that has really struggled in other aspects of the game. So again, I don't want to hammer this too much, but Matt, I feel like it might be the most important part of the slate, trying to figure out, hey, is Tom Brady just going to kind of let Mike Evans do his thing? He's been targeted 2 times in each of his last 2 games, but then he's had some great games with Godwin out. Both of his 100-yard performances have come with Godwin on the sidelines. So who benefits the most here? And do you like Mike Evans?
So I like Mike Evans from a contrarian standpoint. He's not only going to be contrarian because of the coverage, but he's very expensive. When you're dealing with other options, like, for example, let's take DraftKings, for example. We have Evans. If you're going to captain him, it's $16,200. If you go down to Scotty Miller, you're saving nearly $4,000 just by making that pivot. As far as who I think will benefit the most, I think you could honestly look to Miller or Johnson. Both of the Giants' secondary corners and really everyone they're running, including their safeties, have been very poor against coverage. Like, I'm looking at their top 6 corners right now, outside of James Bradbury, who has a passer rating of 62.7 in his coverage, elite. The next highest mark among defensive backs is 96.5. It's brutal.
Wow. Yeah, that's really rough. And I think it tells us a lot about what we're probably going to see. The amount of routes run with Godwin out this season in 3 games. Mike Evans leads the pack by a lot. Scotty Miller's up there with 90, though. The clear number 2 here. So you have Miller. Do you think? So let me ask you this: Justin Watson, Tyler Johnson, Scotty Miller, Mike Evans. If you had to take a guess at target share, let's say Godwin's out the rest of the year. He's not, by the way, but let's say he is, and the season starts today. Who would you say comes in 1, 2, and 3 in target share based on what we've seen this season?
I still would give the edge to Evans, number 1. Again, he's in the particularly difficult spot today, given the strengths and weaknesses of New York's defense. Number 2, I think, is Scotty Miller, and it's just because we've seen Scotty Miller run pretty clearly ahead of Tyler Johnson all year. Last week, for example, Chris Godwin missed part of the game. Miller played on 60% of Tampa Bay snaps, ran a route on 72%. Tyler Johnson played on 40%, ran a route on 45%. So Miller was already more of a full-time player with Chris Godwin on the field. So I think he would be number 2. For what it's worth, I think he'd be fairly close to Mike Evans, and I'd put Tyler Johnson 3rd.
Okay. What about Rob Gronkowski, who's actually been, pretty efficient the last couple of weeks, Matt? He's been targeted 68 times in each of his last 2 games. That's important because the first couple weeks of the season, he was an afterthought. He has 20 targets over his last 3 performances, touchdowns in back-to-back games. And the one thing that I've seen from him, I'm sure you've seen it as well, but Brady has not been afraid to target him downfield either. And at a tight end position, that's something that Gronk has been, so great in the past at being able to rip off some big plays when you need him to. If that happens to be the case again today, should we be looking at someone like Rob Gronkowski to get into our lineups?
I think you absolutely can. I think the main difference with Tampa Bay is losing O.J. Howard. He was playing about 50% of the snaps prior to the injury, and he's jumped above 65% the last 2 weeks. He's still not running a ton of routes. His route rate is fine. He has a 14% target share, and that's been steadily increasing. If we just look to the last 3 games, you mentioned this already, 6 targets, 8 targets, and 8 targets in the last 3 games. But, for example, Scotty Miller's still running more routes. Like, Scotty Miller ran a route on 72% of dropbacks. Rob Gronkowski, just 65%. So I think I'm looking at Awesemo's ownership right now, of course, phenomenal tool. It looks like Rob Gronkowski is going to literally be 6 times his ownership in the captain slot. He's about 10% more in utility. So I think I'm just making the pivot down to Scotty Miller.
Okay, yeah, and I get that too. What's crazy, though, is that Rob Gronkowski leads the team in targets since week 3 by 6. Who would have thought after the first 2 weeks of the season that Rob Gronkowski would be leading the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in targets by a handful?
It definitely wasn't me.
Yeah. Brady looks good, and Gronk looks like he's getting back up to speed, and they haven't necessarily needed Evans in a ton of situations, but this is where everything comes down to. This is the whole reason we're spending a lot of time on the wide receivers here and the pass catchers, because you're probably going to need more than a couple of them to win tonight against this Giants team. That brings us to the running game, though. And well, you know what? Let me ask you about Tom Brady first. He's the most expensive player. If you want to get him into the captain spot, it's going to be $18,000 on DraftKings. So you'll certainly be paying for him. Is Tom Brady a better captain spot play for you? Do you like him more in the utility? Are you going to mix it up a little bit? Right now, 82% projected ownership. I'm sure you noticed this. It's super weird how a lot of times on these showdown slates, you see very condensed ownership at the top, and then it starts to spread out. Brady right now is projected at 82.7. The next closest is Mike Evans at 57.6. If you guys hear that, you should be loving this slate right now, that there's only one guy above 60% on a single game showdown slate.
It's pretty surprising to me because aside from the running backs, it's very condensed. Like, I feel like we know who's going to be on the field the majority of the time. We know who's going to get the ball. So it's interesting to me to just see Brady this high. I'm far more likely to play him in the utility spot. When we look at quarterback, not only is Brady cost prohibitive, but he's not one of these quarterbacks that gives you a lot on the ground. He's not really elevating himself above any of the other players. And the way the DraftKings in particular, their bonus structure is laid out, you need a 300-yard passing game to really eclipse some of the point per reception, the 100-yard bonuses that your receivers rack up, not to mention what the runners are going to do as well. So I'm typically not going to get a lot of Brady in captain, especially at his elevated ownership. I'm more than comfortable playing him in the utility spot.
Okay, fair enough. The running back position, Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette, when healthy, they've not been afraid to get Leonard Fournette involved in this offense. And I think it surprised many, I'll speak for myself. It surprised me to see that Leonard Fournette was involved heavily as a pass catcher last game with 7 targets, hauling in 6 of them for 47 yards. He did it in Jacksonville, but he never really managed to do much with it. It'd be like 5, 6, 7-yard receptions here and there. Nothing really all that spectacular. And you see something similar, but Brady went to him often. He played 56% of the snaps to Ronald Jones, 43. I still think Ronald Jones is going to be heavily involved, but is this a sign of things to come as far as the backfield split goes on the ground and maybe even through the air?
I think it could be. I mean, Ronald Jones has never been a phenomenal pass catcher in his entirety of his career at Tampa Bay. Leonard Fournette has done it. He's been questionable at best, I'd say, as a pass catcher, but I think just the 6 targets for him last week compared to Ronald Jones' 1 was really telling. And
got 2, but still, yeah, it was a big...
2. Yeah, very, very concerning for me. And I think just given the price, I'd be more willing to pay down for Leonard Fournette. Like you said, they clearly have a plan for him, and at best, this is a timeshare.
Okay, so Leonard Fournette, I don't really have a ton of interest in throwing him in at the captain spot, but he's in the utility. You're getting him at 6,200. That's 1,200 less than the Buccaneers defense, Matt. Ronald Jones is 8,800. So you're saying that discount is enough for you? And I guess if you said you got to tell a story, if that's the case, and say you're projecting a blowout, why not go with the significantly cheaper running back? Because if they go up by a lot of points, you're going to see them try and run the ball down the Giants' throats. And I would assume that the cheaper back is going to get almost as much, if not more work than Ronald Jones, especially in that scenario.
The workload's been hard to project. We know it's been basically a 50-50 timeshare when they're healthy. A lot of times we'll just use ownership to break these tiebreakers because I don't have a strong lean in who's going to receive more carries and more targets between them. I take a look at ownership. I see Ronald Jones, who is more expensive, projected for more ownership in both the utility slot and the captain slot. And it makes the decision a little bit easier for me in targeting Fournette.
Okay. Is there anything else on the Bucs team? We'll get to the defense in a moment because I actually want to spend a second there that we haven't talked about as far as skill players go.
I think some people might be tricked into playing Cameron Brate. He's extremely cheap. But last week in particular, we saw Tampa Bay move away from 12 personnel. In their last 3 games, so 2 and 3 games ago, Cameron Brate ran a route on 41% and 38% of dropbacks. Last week, that dropped to 11%. And I found that kind of interesting considering Chris Godwin got hurt in the game. I don't know if this was a game plan specific thing for Tampa Bay, but Cameron Brate has not been heavily involved this year. So I think I would much rather look to the third pass catcher in Tyler Johnson over a guy like Cameron Brate.
Okay, and last one here, we had a question from someone in our premium chat over at Awesemo.com. He said, if this game blows out, does LaShawn McCoy get some run in a blowout, Matt?
I highly doubt it. Tampa Bay has basically blown out their last 2 opponents. They beat Las Vegas 45-20 last week. The prior week, 38-10 over Green Bay. LaShawn McCoy's basically been uninvolved. Yep.
Yeah, 4 attempts for 1 yard in that game. It's been rough. Outside of one performance against Carolina, where he was targeted 7 times in the passing game, he's been an afterthought. So I'm with you. I think it's Jones and Fournette. You're going to have to guess right between the two. Do you have any interest in rostering Fournette and Jones in the same lineup? Normally it would be crazy, right? But they're huge favorites, 13-point favorites. Both of those guys could see 15 or so touches because, correct me if I'm wrong, last week in a blowout, let me make sure. Leonard Fournette had 18 total looks, 11 on the ground, 6 through the air. Ronald Jones had 15 total looks, 13 on the ground and 2 through the air. So both of them saw 15 plus opportunities in a blowout. If it goes the same way, I can at least get behind saying, you know what, if you wanted to go with that and get away from the passing game a little bit, 30 plus opportunities potentially between the two. It's not the craziest idea. And my guess is it will be vastly overlooked and very unpopular tonight.
I agree with you completely. I think part of the reason Tampa Bay can do this is they run a decent amount of plays. They're 12th in plays per game, 11th in seconds per play. I think it's possible. I'm a little worried about the cost. Normally when I like to do this, it will be a situation where we have one really cheap back, one more expensive back. They're both kind of in that middle to expensive range. But I feel like today in particular, we have fewer options at the bottom that I'm considering. You mentioned the defense. I mean, in a normal week, you could maybe play the defense as your cheap play. This week, I mean, unless you're playing the Giants, getting to Tampa Bay's defense is very difficult.
Yeah, exactly. And, perfect segue from you. What are we doing with Tampa's defense? I played the Eagles defense in almost every lineup last night. So I wasn't afraid to pay up for them at 6,200 because with DiNucci, we knew what we were expecting, or we knew that was a possible scenario, a possible result is them getting to the quarterback, forcing fumbles, getting some picks, and then luckily we got a defensive touchdown. They're even more expensive tonight at 7,400, but man, they could annihilate Daniel Jones in this offense, who, as you mentioned, missing a key offensive lineman as well.
I think they're probably in your player pool. I don't feel great about it with some of the options we already talked about that are, surprisingly cheaper. And like you mentioned, I think the defensive touchdown really helped us last night. Like, what if Tampa Bay just has a really solid game? They rack up a couple sacks, maybe a few turnovers, but they don't score. Do you think they end up in the optimal lineup in that situation? Because I'm not 100% sure that they would outscore, like Fournette and some of the cheaper receivers.
I think it's a different situation today than it was last night, for sure. Well, one of the reasons, too, is yesterday you still had some good options, right? You had Boston Scott. You had Dallas Goedert, who didn't do anything, wasn't even targeted till late in the game, but still someone that was inexpensive enough, especially with Ertz out, to maybe make some noise. Travis Fulgham, who's the absolute GOAT. I love this kid, Matt. He's going to be awesome. He is. He's going to be great. Hightower, for some reason, Wentz was still throwing to him. Worst decision ever. Just cut the guy. But my point is, between Rager and Goddard and Fulgham and Scott and Wentz, there were a decent amount of options on that team. And then you could choose from like a cheap Michael Gallup, CeeDee Lamb, Ezekiel, whatever you want to do. But the Eagles defense just seemed to fit. I think you're right in saying that some of these cheaper values below 7,400 might just fit better than the Eagles fit last night.
Yeah, I think so. And defense is such a variant position. Would you be surprised if the Giants end up, like, they get in good field position, whether it's a turnover or a good special teams play or something, and they punch in a few touchdowns? With as variant as defense is, I think paying that much salary is kind of difficult to do. I will have them in my player pool because of all the upside we've talked about with the missing O-lineman and the struggles New York has had already. But I think going overweight on the field or really locking them in might be a mistake.
Okay, fair enough. I don't intend on locking them in, but I do still have quite a bit of interest in them. Just because if this game goes the way I think it's going to go, then I want some of that. Last thing I'll say on this, if you do decide that you're going to run some lineups, for you guys that are hand-making lineups, if you do decide you're going to run some lineups with Fournette and Jones in the same lineup, that is a spot where I absolutely would not hesitate to get the defense in there, right? There's positive correlation, Matt, knowing that if they're running the ball and the passing game isn't doing a lot, there's a very high likelihood that the defense did something on their end to keep Brady from having to throw the football.
Yeah, I think you're right. The correlation's pretty strong there. And you like defensive touchdowns a ton, but I think just given the fact that they can still rack up turnovers, sacks, everything like that, it would, in that case, it would make sense.
For sure. All right, we'll talk about the Giants. Before we do, if you guys haven't checked out Awesemo.com yet, we would absolutely love to have you over there. Join the family, and there's a million different ways to do it. You can get the Express Pass, which is $3.95 a week. If you like these showdowns, I know we all do. All of our showdown content is included in that Express Pass, that weekly Express Pass. It's all of the ownership projections, the player projections, the top players tool, which is amazing. It's just probabilities thing. What's the probability that he's the top player overall in the day? Probability that he is between 2 or 6, obviously given the utility spot. Same thing applies on FanDuel with their structure. Alex Baker, Awesemo, you know who he is. He built these tools. He uses these tools himself and then lets us use them. Well, doesn't let us use them, well, he does. He lets us use them. And we've had a ton of success with them, and they're awesome tools. So for less than $4 a week, you get all the showdown content. That's on top of the other stuff. Like we have this Express Top Stacks tool for the main slate and the other slate included in that. The rankings included in that $4 or $3.95 a week package. Then you can go with the Express or the Awesemo Plus Platinum if you wanted to go with all of the NFL content or all of our sports. If you wanted to get PGA, UFC, NASCAR, all of that stuff included. There's something for everybody, whether you want to do the week, the month, the year, you name it. But like I said, these are Awesemo's tools, #1 ranked DFS player in the world. They are fantastic. And all of the amazing articles that these guys put out every single week, from Matt to Kyle to Ben to Adam to everybody, and the lineup builder, the fantasy cruncher add-on. There's so much. So go check it out. Even if you're not ready yet, go give it a look. And a lot of times we'll have free content out there too, so you can see, so you can get a sneak peek at some of that stuff. The NFL Showdown and Single Game Top Plays tool, the one I was telling you about, the one with the probabilities, is actually free today on the site under the NFL dropdown. So check that out. Go to awesemo.com/join. And if you do decide to join a community, make sure to jump into our premium Slack chat. You got people talking DFS, NFL, sports betting around the clock. And it's a very cool community to be a part of. All right, Matt, we spent a lot of time on the Bucs. I don't think we're going to spend as much time on the Giants. They have a 16-point implied total. I'll let you start with Daniel Jones. Go ahead.
Yeah, man, he's been very disappointing this year. If we just look at some of the peripheral stats, 6.1 yards per attempt, that's 32nd. He's completing 62% of his passes, that's 26th. Obviously not great from a passing standpoint. What we really like about Daniel Jones is his rushing equity. And we saw it last week on the Showdown slate. He rips off the 80-yard touchdown, falls down. But that's really what we like about Daniel Jones, and I think it's his best path to entering the optimal lineup, and particularly the captain spot, which is a place I don't particularly love him. But I think if that's how it happens, it's going to be with his legs.
Okay. Who are we pairing him with? From Slayton to Shepard to, God, it gets so ugly. I mean, Evan Engram has had such a disappointing campaign. Every week you think something good's going to happen. Even when he's targeted 9 times against the Eagles, he finishes with under 50 yards. He averaging, I think it was like 7 yards per target. It's been really tough, Matt. And Golden Tate, meanwhile, had that one reception for a touchdown in the Showdown slate against the Eagles, which put him in the winning lineups. But he had one reception for a 39-yard touchdown, which is exactly what he's done in back-to-back weeks. One reception, 3 total targets over the last 2 games for the Giants. So it is very tough to figure out where to turn here and who really gets priority.
I think part of the problem is New York can't pass protect. So they can't run these downfield route concepts. So Evan Engram ends up being targeted so often in the short to intermediate part of the field, and it's definitely hurting their offense. What New York has kind of done to mitigate some of these pass protection problems is bring in a second tight end. And they brought in Caden Smith a lot. He played in 60% of New York snaps last week, only ran 12 routes. So that's a 31% route rate. This guy's mainly blocking. And what it's done is it's pulled Golden Tate off the field a lot. Golden Tate, again, target counts of 1 and 2 in his last 2 weeks. When he's on the field, he's still running a lot of routes. He ran 28 last week. That was, like significantly more than Caden Smith, who actually played more raw snaps. But I don't love that it's pulling Golden Tate off for even some pass situations. So that leads me to just try to get to Slate and Shepard and Engram. targeting those three, I mean, it's been pretty rough. Darius Slayton in particular, he has a 22% target share on the year. But since Sterling Shepard's return, those have really decreased. In his last 2 games, he has target counts of 4 and 4. Shepard last week already rebounded for 8. That was his first game since injury. And this has kind of been the story with Darius Slayton throughout his young career. Most of his big games have occurred when Sterling Shepard, Golden Tate was injured a little bit last year. His big games occur when those 2 players are off the field.
You're right. It's an important point to make today. I think they're going to have a tough time running the football and passing the football. Let me ask you, how good do you think the Bucs defense is, knowing that Pro Football Focus, and this is just one metric, of course, you can go to a number of different areas, but I'm just for the matter of saving, for the sake of saving time, has them ranked number 1 in coverage grade, and then in run defense, they're number 6, but I think from what we've seen, they're just unstoppable on the ground. How good do you think they really are?
I initially thought they weren't great. I mean, if you look at their opponents to open the year, they played the Carolina Panthers. I think we've seen them perform a little bit above expectation now. They played in that game against Denver where Drew Lock was hurt, so that was mostly a Brett Rippon game. And then, I mean, they did play some good opponents. They have the Chargers, the Packers. Derek Carr's actually played well this year. They faced the Las Vegas Raiders. So, I mean, I think I personally was a little too low on this Tampa Bay pass defense. I think maybe they're not the number 1 coverage unit, but they're certainly very good.
Yes, that's exactly the way I feel about it too. I thought that they would come into the league or the season, their pass defense would be improved from last year because it couldn't go anywhere but up, right? But their run defense, you guys have heard me say that, it swallows opposing runners up whole. Like, there's just nowhere to go. And, you know, maybe they haven't faced the best running backs this season, but they're still remarkably good in both phases of the game. I forgot to tell you guys, by the way, we have a $250 giveaway on Twitter right now. You just have to guess if Daniel Jones or Tom Brady will have more passing yards. I think I know where people are going to go there. Reply to the tweet with your answer, and you just have to follow us on Twitter. While you're at it, follow Matt. Get this man's follower count up. He does awesome work here. Like, awesome. The man just quit his day job, for God's sakes. Show him some love. At Matt_Gajewski. If you're not following me yet, at Loughie_D, LOUGHY_D. I'm just baffled by how little intrigue there is when it comes to this Giants team, just as maybe a little bit more than there was yesterday, because Daniel Jones, despite what you want to say about him, is still a marginal upgrade from DiNucci, but it's not good. And the problem is, if we take a look and say, let's pivot to the run game, Matt, well, Devontae Freeman's out, and he was actually getting a ton of work, even in negative game scripts when he was healthy. Now you're talking about Wayne Gallman getting the start against an incredibly stout run defense, but also Wayne Gallman, who had 5 targets last time out, and Dion Lewis, who I'm scared, even though Gallman got those targets, that Lewis is going to get them, especially because he had that early game fumble and maybe he was just in the doghouse. So even in the run game, even in the backfield, I have no clue what to do with the Giants.
I think it's probably Gallman. I'm just kind of confused why they have Dion Lewis on their roster. He's basically just been a pass catcher for them the entire year, and then he gets the 0 targets last week. Like, if we look at Wayne Gallman's career with the Giants, he's been a fairly good pass catcher for them. And Saquon Barkley's missed a couple of games over his career. But Wayne Gallman, if we go back to, 2017 was the last time he handled like a significant workload for multiple weeks. And if we look down the stretch that year, he had games. These are 3 consecutive games for Wayne Gallman in his career. 9 targets, 7 targets, and 8 targets. And then in a couple spot duties, he's had target counts similar to that over the last few years as well. So Gallman has been a notable pass catcher for this Giants team in the past. I think they're probably going to roll with him. And at his price, I mean, he's cheaper than all of the notable receivers except Golden Tate. Would you be willing to play Wayne Gallman just on the fact that if he gets 5 dump offs and I don't know, even like 30, 40 yards, there's a chance he enters the optimal? Because we're going to have to play someone on the Giants. It's just deciphering who it is.
And that's the concern here. You said, will I be willing to play Gallman or Lewis? You said Gallman, right?
Yeah, Gallman. Sorry. If I said Lewis, I meant Gallman.
No, I think you did. I was making sure. Well, that's what I mean. If Gallman didn't have those targets last game out, then especially with Freeman getting injured, I would have more interest in Lewis. But You just broke it down well. That's what keeps me coming back to Gallman. The crazy thing is, like, I expect him to do virtually nothing on the ground, and I'm just hoping that maybe he gets 4 or 5 receptions. You got 4 points there. Maybe he breaks off like a few decent chunk plays, and he has 25, 30 yards rushing, which I swear, even that seems far-fetched. So, like, my goal for him would be to get to 9 or 10 DraftKings points, but you can't just play $6. You probably don't want to anyway. You need to play a Giants player. So that's what we're doing here, Matt. We got a couple minutes to go. Let's figure it out. Who do we want from the Giants? If we had to pick 1 or 2 guys, who do we feel most comfortable with that maybe they can put up a decent enough total? Because even Gallup yesterday, had like 15 fantasy points. That was enough to get you there. Who is it for you?
My favorite pass catcher on the Giants is still Sterling Shepard. I know Darius Slayton has been their wide receiver 1. Again, most of that has come when Sterling Shepard's been injured. So let's take just the small sample we have last week. Sterling Shepard, 8 targets, Darius Slayton, 4. We also have Sterling Shepard coming in with a cheaper price here. With that small sample, that's the way I'm going to lean. Again, I don't feel great about it because the sample is so small, but it's at least one data point we can point to here.
Okay. And I was talking about including the running backs too, but it would be Shepard over everyone on the team, correct?
Yes.
Okay. If there was one other guy, let's say you're doing a 4-2, we want to provide these viewers with as much as we possibly can here. These showdown slates are awesome, but they can get tricky for sure. Is Gallman number 2, or would it be Slayton or Shepard, or Ingram or somebody else?
I do like Slayton. I think his target share will be the second highest on the team behind Shepard. But at that point, if you're running a 4-2, are you paying up for both of the expensive Giants pass catchers?
Right.
I'm not sure that that's the route you want to take. So I think maybe playing one of the expensive guys. If you think it's Slayton, fine. I don't see there being a huge difference between Slayton and Shepard.
I'd rather go Shepard too. Take the discount.
Yeah, that's how I feel. And then if you're not going to play Slayton and Shepard, you're going to have to pay down a little bit somewhere. So maybe Wayne Gallman fits the bill as someone who could see, like 5 or 6 dump offs. But Evan Ingram sort of in that price range, 9 targets last week. You just have to be okay with him essentially getting no receiving yards. I don't hate Golden Tate, and it's because when he's on the field, he's running routes. You just have to be okay with him coming off the field a decent amount for Caden Smith in blocking situations. But Golden Tate is very cheap.
Could it be by any chance Graham Gano, who ends up being someone that you throw in there, knowing that yesterday Greg Zuerlein had a very solid game? He also missed another field goal that could have, and it was very windy. Did you see the one? It looked like an actual slurve, like, a slider curve in baseball. It was insane. He could have had an even bigger game with that 49-yarder, or he might have been even a 50-plus. That would have added to the tally for sure. Does Graham Gano enter the playing pool? Does he enter the conversation here in the event that, like you said, maybe they just get in favorable field position, can't really move the ball, and end up kicking a few field goals?
For sure. You laid it out from, a game theory perspective. And then I think just looking at the low scoring total, I'm much more likely to target a kicker in low total games. We'll just see less touchdowns. I think less chances for other skill position players to outscore the kicker. So in a low total game, I'm more likely to take the kicker.
All right. So, Matt, we'll close it with this. And for those of you guys just joining late, you're going to rewatch it from the beginning. We're happy to have everyone with us. Help us build the channel here, though, if you don't mind. Hit that thumbs up. But more importantly, if you're not subscribed to the channel, subscribe. It's a win-win for both of us here. If you want to hit the notification bell so you know when new content's dropping next, you can do that as well. But yeah, if you subscribe, it'll show up more in your recommended feed. You won't forget about us, and you don't want to forget about us. Matt, what is the best way to get different on this slate, if there's any way to do it? I'll set the table for you. You can wrap this show up. The ownership is coming in, Brady, Evans, Daniel Jones still up there, Ronald Jones, Slayton, Gronk, Fournette, Shepard, they're all above 30%. And then you're getting down to some lesser owned guys like Tyler Johnson, Tate, Gano, and a bunch of others. I'm not going to rattle off everyone, but what would your way to differentiate on this slate be?
So we're seeing Tom Brady and Mike Evans come in as the two most owned Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think you do want a Tampa Bay Buccaneer in your captain slot. I like to fade them both in that position. Mike Evans, we talked long about this. Not only has he been down this year, but he's in the toughest matchup against James Bradbury. I think you can pivot to one of the ancillary pass catchers in Scotty Miller or Tyler Johnson. They'd be a very nice stack with Tom Brady in the utility slot. You fade all of the ownership that's coming in on Mike Evans in a tough spot. And then to get a little bit different on the other side, I think you can also get away from Darius Slayton, who I think is not 100% to be the number one receiver on that team, and play Sterling Shepard as your preferred Giant. And then I think you'll have a fairly contrarian lineup. Round that out with some, maybe the rushers from Tampa Bay or, a secondary Tampa Bay stack, and you'll be fairly contrarian.
Beautiful. That'll do it for us. Guys, thanks for watching. Best of luck today. Remember, stick around. Coming up next in only 15 minutes, it's the Monday Morning Quarterback Show, recapping everything from Week 8, taking a look at lineup study on Fantasy Cruncher, looking at applying some of these principles to the following week, what we did right, what all of us did wrong. Adam Scher, Josh Engelman, and myself are coming up next. And remember, all of our shows are available on any podcast platform. You check it out. If you don't want to go on the YouTube, if you want to do it a different way, maybe you're working, maybe you want to have your phone in your pocket, iTunes, anything, podcast is available. Be sure to check that out. We'll see you guys back here. Matt and I, this Thursday, every Monday and Thursday, we do this Showdown strategy show. So make it a part of your routine. Join us and stick around. 15 minutes from now, we'll be doing another one, wrapping up the Week 8 slate. Peace.